I've been actually like drowning in thesis stuff, but I am gonna graduate in like a month. And then I'm gonna be reading so much. In the midst of my busy life, I have been able to read a few books, and I just finished reading everything that Lily King has ever made. If you've watched any of my videos, I feel like I talk about at least one of her books in every video, and you would know that I love her. Okay, let's get a little background and get to know this woman, this mastermind of a woman. So Lily King grew up in Massachusetts. She got her BA in English Lit from UNC Chapel Hill, and then her master's in creative writing from Syracuse. Right after grad school, she got a job teaching high school English in Valencia, Spain. You see a lot of Spain in many of her books, which I think is awesome. Like little Easter eggs she's hiding for us, or maybe not. She's just writing what she knows. 8 years later, in 1999, her first novel was published, which is The Pleasing Hour. She published a lot more books in between these two, but I'm just gonna note this next one. In 2020, she published Writers and Lovers. I think it's her most popular book. For me, this is the one I read first that really got me into her work. And then in September of 2025, she published Heart the Lover, which is her most recent release. This is me meeting her. She was so lovely and she signed my book. Anyway, let's get into the actual books themselves. I was debating how I wanted to talk about them. I think I'm gonna go in the order that I read them. So obviously starting with Writers and Lovers, this book centers around Casey Peabody, who is 31 and she's recently lost her mother. She works at a restaurant. She's like drowning in student debt. She's getting over this terrible guy. She's also a writer. What I really like about this book is that it's, number one, just written so well. I have a hard time like describing her writing style now that I've read so many of her books, but I remember when I read it the first time, I felt like her writing was very unique and kind of addictive. Like she really trusts the reader. She's really into subtlety. She's not over explaining. I just reread it for the second time. There's no better way to describe this book than just delightful. I remember the first time I read it, I was so excited to come home every day and sit in bed and read this book. And like hours would go by and I would just be so content to be in this world. I don't know if it's because I relate to Casey so much or because it's just written so well. I mean, it's funny, it's endearing. I think this book is also a really great portrayal of like kind of being on the cusp of true adulthood, being on the precipice of the rest of your life. I think a big part of that also is her mother passing away, or her mother having been passed away. Like I said in the beginning, she's really good at subtlety. And I think when she talks about dealing with her mother's death, it's very subtle and it's not like, obviously we know Colleen Hoover is Colleen Hoover. So I'm not saying like they're in any way comparable, but I remember in high school, I read a little bit of Regretting You from Colleen Hoover. And the way that she described it, she would just be like, the grief was too much to handle. Every day was struck with grief. Not that I'm comparing the two necessarily, but just as an example, like the way she would talk about Casey's mom being gone was like Casey would go through something exciting and then come home and be like, I'm gonna text my mom. And then I realized she's gone. Stuff like that where it's just like you feel it. Like you feel everything with her. I've noticed this kind of become a theme in all of her books, but she's always talking about writers and literature. It's just really motivating. It makes me feel like, okay, like this is my community. Like I like people that read and I like reading about people that read. Soon after that, Heart the Lover came out and I picked it up and I think my life did change after I read this book. It's basically set in 3 different parts. We have part 1 in college, part 2 is in the future, and part 3 is a little further in the future. We see these characters when they're in college and when they're like quite new to life. Everything feels like potential, it feels new, it feels exciting. Since this is her most recent book, you can tell she's really honed her craft. She's using all of her talent to make you feel. And that is the overarching takeaway for me that I think Lily King is a master at, is making you feel. No matter what the story is about, no matter how much you are initially invested, like she's gonna make you feel what she wants you to feel, and she's good at it. So in part 1, you're feeling this sense of like beginnings and kind of a sense of innocence, and then after the time jump, it's so jarring to see these characters from, I don't even know, like 20, 30 years later, and they're looking back on their college days and thinking about all the things that they could have done differently. It's also really interesting to see how much their college experience kind of stays with them and in a way kind of shapes their adulthood. Reading it as someone still in college, it's always something I've wondered, like, am I actually going to be thinking about this person 20 years from now? Like, I feel young still, and I feel like I can't imagine that 40-year-old me is still going to be like thinking about this person or still be affected by this like breakup or whatever it is. This book is very much about the people that like still affect you and how much your adolescence and your college years affect you in your adulthood. It's a beautiful story. It's really, really powerful. The next book I read was Father of the Rain. This book takes place in some sort of like waspy East Coast town. We're following Daly, who is a child at the beginning, and we end when she's about 30-ish, I'm pretty sure. And this book is about her relationship with her alcoholic father. She also, I feel like, is really good at setting up good stakes, where it's like, it doesn't feel calculated. It doesn't feel like, oh, she just needed them to have a challenge, so she put this in the novel. It's like, everything feels believable and then also very stressful. I think that this book does a really good job of portraying that relationship with a parent who has not necessarily always been the best to you or always been there for you in the way that you needed them to be, but you will never stop saving them, even if you don't always want to. I think she does a really good job of humanizing this otherwise cold and complicated person that is her father. She kind of cracks open that facade that her dad is just an alcoholic who kind of has not been the best to her or her mother. Okay, she has this collection of short stories called 5 Tuesdays in Winter. I feel like the only reason I didn't particularly like this is because I just wanted more from all of them. If any short story in this book became a full novel, like, I would love it. Some of these stories are pretty short, and even in that like small amount of pages, she manages to pull out your heartstrings. I then read Euphoria. So this book takes place in 1930s in Papua New Guinea. We have 3 kind of main characters. We have Nellie, Finn, and a man whose name I am forgetting. Nellie and Finn are anthropologists. They're on this new island. They're studying different groups of people that live on these islands. And they meet another anthropologist. He kind of like changes their lives. There's actually a lot of similarities between this one and Heart the Lover in kind of like the dynamics between the 3 people. I personally was less interested in this premise than I was with her other books, but that being said, I was very, very touched by this book. One thing Lily King does really well, and that now that I've read all of her books, I'm noticing that the pattern is she describes really well being in a relationship with one person who is maybe not satisfying you completely, and then meeting someone who just automatically knows you and does all the things you need them to do. That's kind of the vibe of this book. I remember reading it and being like, damn. Okay, so her husband partner, I forget. His name's Fen. And then the other guy, who she's kind of more in love with, she calls B. Topics that are sure to cause tension between Fen and me become productive discussions with B there. For long stretches of time, it felt like we were crawling around in each other's brain. I only know that when Fen leaves and B and I talk, I feel like I'm saying and hearing the first wholly honest words of my life. I'd had years of study and years in the field, but my real education, this method of persistence I would draw on for the rest of my career, happened right then with Nell. Oh my god, this passage. I try not to return to these moments very often, for I end up lacerating my young self for not simply kissing the girl. I thought we had time. Despite everything, I believed somehow there was time. Love's first mistake. Perhaps love's only mistake. Time for you and time for me, and what would it have mattered in the end? What would it have altered to have kissed her then, that night? Everything, nothing, impossible to know. Girl, I just remember reading this and thinking like, she could write a book about the dead spider on my windowsill and it would probably make me cry. Then I read The English Teacher. It's an alternating perspective book of a mother slash teacher. Her name's Vita, and then her 15-year-old son, Peter. She gets engaged to a man, and then they get married, and now Peter has 3 step siblings. So the 2 families merge, and that's when we're kind of thrown into their story. The alternating perspectives is kind of fun because you see 2 very different sides of this new family dynamic. From the baseline of loving all of her books, I think this is the one I enjoyed the least, just because I feel like I didn't really relate to any of her main characters. I mean, you don't have to relate to enjoy, but I do like to relate a little bit. I think if I had read this in high school, I would have like loved it. I would have been like blown away by the plot reveal, but I think it's kind of a story that I've heard before. I did really enjoy kind of the questions it brought up for me though, and I can't really talk about it without spoiling it, but the mystery and like the reveal of the mystery had me thinking a lot about it. Had me just thinking, I guess. The last book I read was actually her debut novel, so I went really backwards. The Pleasing Hour. I just finished it today and I really loved this book, and I didn't totally expect to love it as much as I did, but I think that this might be right under Writers and Lovers for me. It's crazy that it's her first book she ever wrote because I feel like it's written with so much wisdom. So this book takes place in France. Our main character, Rosie, is about 19, I think, and she moves to this houseboat in Paris to basically be a live-in nanny slash caretaker for the house. There's a word for it in French, but I don't know how to say it. Her first impression of the family is she walks up to them and the mother, Nicole, is topless. Areola's out wearing just a bikini bottoms. There's 3 kids and then the mother, Nicole, and her husband, Mark. If I were to compare this to a book, I think I would compare it to Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, which is also another great novel, but I saw a lot of similarities there. It's a really good character study, I would say, because you get into the minds of all the characters. When she writes dialogue in different languages, she doesn't always like translate it for you, which I kind of like, sometimes it's a little confusing, but I kind of like it because you either translate it yourself or you just kind of read between the lines and you figure it out, and I enjoy that. It just feels like I'm looking into a window of this world. I think the reason her work has stood out so much to me and has had such a grasp on me is because she just so deeply understands the heart and human connection, true, real, deep human connection. I feel like it's a concept that is so difficult to portray and so easy to get wrong, and she just gets it right every time. You genuinely feel everything for all of the characters in her books. I think after reading all of her work, it's made it really hard for me to read anything else because nothing is as good, in my opinion. Like, I feel like I read her books and I see through her lens of the way she writes and the way she sees the world and how she portrays that through her characters. And then going from that to like another book, it's just a downgrade every time. When I went to her book signing, she talked about how she handwrites all of her books and then puts them in a computer, and I thought that was so cool. I like that sometimes she'll say, like in her dialogue, she'll have a character speak and just say like, "Why are you laughing?" to the other person, and she doesn't have to explain that that person's laughing. She says it through the dialogue. And so in reading the dialogue, you kind of visualize also what is physically happening without her having to say what is physically happening. God, I would do anything to take one of her classes. You know, obviously I've explained a lot in this video, but you just gotta read one of her books. You just gotta know what it's like to experience a work from Lily King. So yeah, anyways, I'm just so thankful that her books exist, and thanks for watching.